It's a pleasure to be part of the Canadian Game Studies Association annual meeting and conference, and my presentation is entitled Contested Spaces, Velvet Ropes, Exclusion Zones, The Pleasures and Dangers of Face-to-Face Play in Analog Gaming Spaces. I'm Tanya Pobeda. So here's a picture of me, a couple of pictures actually, and I just thought you might want to see my face as I do this animated video as opposed to a Zoom recording. I hope you like it. This is research from my PhD dissertation that looked at representation in board gaming across racial and gender dimensions. I looked at Board Game Geek, which is a large crowdsourced global portal of board game information, and analyzed the artwork and the labor of board game design to determine what the racial and gender composition of those two key elements were. What's the artwork on the covers of the board games, and who designed these board games? One of the first things that I identified is in the top 400 Board Game Geek ranked games, 92.6% of those games were designed by white men. The other thing I looked at was the imagery on the cover art of the top 200 Board Game Geek ranked games. And I discovered of the nearly 2,000 figures that I recorded, 82.5% of those human representations were white presenting figures. In addition, 76.8% of the nearly 2,000 figures that I recorded were men or boys, so appeared to be male. I conducted a visual analysis of the top 200 Board Game Geek ranked games, counting nearly 2,000 figures, which included human representation as well as any fauna, and that included fictional creatures as well. And what I discovered was you're more likely to see an alien, an orc, an ogre, a creature that does not exist, than you are to see an image of a human woman. So looking at the labor of board game design and the artwork of board games in that top ranked 200 Board Game Geek ranked games was kind of an empirical level set to say, okay, what is the state of representation in board gaming? And then making the pivot into what is it like to be a person in an embodied space like a friendly local game store, a convention, anywhere that a board gaming experience might be had. What is it like? And I got a lot of comments from survey participants that sounded like this one. This one says, our local board game convention is whiter than Wonder Bread, and the game designer club I attend has an all-male attendance 95% of the time. I'll drill a little bit more deeply into the online survey methodology in a moment, but this was a top-line finding. One of the questions posed the statement, the board gaming industry is dominated by white men. Now, I've been doing market research studies for a very long time using Likert scales, and it's pretty rare to see this level of passion. 61.9% strongly agreed with that statement, and 27.7% agreed, leaving a total of 89.6% that is strongly agreed or agreed, a high level of passion with this statement. I actually worked in my past career in public health and was exposed to the work of Dr. David Williams. He's a Harvard University professor and an internationally recognized authority on racism as a key determinant of health. And he talked about the physical and mental toll of racism, incivility, being treated badly, as well as microaggressions, and how it's almost a death of 1,000 cuts when people are exposed to constant scorn, ridicule, and again, microaggressions in the workplace, during play, and at home. I conducted a survey in late 2020 of 320 avid board game participants who board game on a self-reported basis 70.7% of the time, at least once a week. And these avid board gamers weighed in on issues of representation. What was also really interesting about the participants of my PhD dissertation survey is many of them, the majority of my sample, had been board gaming for over 11 years or more. What was also really great about my PhD dissertation survey is I intentionally recruited for diversity of my sample, and I wanted to make sure I was hearing from the voices of women, LGBTQ+, non-binary participants, trans women, trans men, agender individuals. I wanted a diversity of gender identities as well as racial identities to fill out the survey. And what I got was a sample size of 60.4% women, including trans women, in the survey, because I very much wanted to hear from underrepresented voices in the board gaming community. About 20.4% of the participants of the online survey self-identified as Black, Indigenous, or persons of color. That was a little lower than I wanted, but it definitely got a great participation rate from very, very active BIPOC board gamers in this sample. The other wonderful thing about the online survey is I had terrific representation and participation from LGBTQ plus gamers who were really, really invested both in the hobby and in the industry, and they represented just over half of my sample. The survey respondents agreed at 31.3% of the time that they had experienced homophobic remarks while participating in the hobby. Another 1 in 3 of the respondents' statement was gendered name calling. There was 36.3% agreement with the statement, I have experienced gendered name calling and insults about gender while participating in board gaming, with 24.4% agreeing with that statement and 8.5% strongly agreeing with that statement. Some of the qualitative feedback that I heard from respondents really broke my heart. This one is a good example of the types of feedback I got from some of the trans men and women that filled out the survey. In this particular case, this respondent replies, I haven't been out for very long, so I haven't engaged with the board gaming community outside of personal friends presenting female. There were other qualitative comments like this one. This respondent said, in fact, I am highly respected at our local convention, and people come to me if they want to learn an awesome game. Yes, there are guys there who don't believe me at first and make it tough, but when they realize I'm the only one with the answer they needed, and they realize that I'm not as dim-witted as they thought. Lots of perspectives about participation in industry events and the sexism, racism, homophobia, and transphobia that can kind of be threaded through those types of encounters. One of the really interesting findings of my PhD dissertation research is the interplay between representation in board gaming artwork, in the themes, in the stories that are told within the games, as well as in the labor of board game design, how that interplay impacts embodied play within public board gaming spaces. And in this case, an individual wrote in, I'm never going to see Indigenous people represented as anything other than barbarians in need of civilization. I've stopped caring for the most part because if I cared, I'd be mad all the time, and I don't have the mental energy for that anymore. And what's fascinating about some of these findings is the level of discontent these avid board gamers feel for the hobby that they love. Other respondents talked about the act of play feeling a little like a transgressive act. In this particular instance, a woman shared her experiences playing a wargaming RPG and her encounters with the GM. In this case, and this is a quote, he then treated every idea I had with disdain, and again spoke to me like my ideas were stupid and I was an idiot, yet none of the rest of the players, all men, were spoken to this way. And when one of the others decided to use a plan the GM had treated as particularly stupid coming from me, the GM hailed the act as fantastic, and the character as having balls of steel. 66.4% of the people who filled out my survey for my PhD dissertation reported agreeing or strongly agreeing to the statement, I have experienced incivility, being talked over, interrupted, talked down to, dismissed, or ignored while participating in the board gaming hobby. Another avid board gamer and survey participant said this, I have not experienced outright incivility, although I have been in situations that come close to being white-splaining. 26.6% of survey respondents agreed or strongly agreed that they have experienced unwelcome sexual advances while participating in the board gaming hobby. Participants shared stories like this one. A guy massaged my head without consent and tried a second time. Another survey respondent shared this. I've encountered a couple of creepy guys in role-playing. The GM has stepped in with both to ensure my safety. In one instance, an older guy whose daughter sometimes played with the group was running a D&D in a pub and waited with me after the game until my flatmate arrived because of the behavior of one of the players. Neither of us had met before, spending a lot of time during the game staring at my breasts, and the DM didn't want there to be a point where I might be alone with him. One of the big ideas about the research I conducted for my PhD dissertation research was that this delimits the entire board gaming, role-playing, tabletop industry. The lack of welcome, the lack of inclusivity, the homogeneity of the play spaces in which people enter creates a huge risk management problem for the entire gaming sector. And one of the big top-line findings that I'm sharing as widely as I possibly can with publishers, with industry types, is this one, which is before the global pandemic, I sometimes felt out of place when I attended board gaming events outside my home. And this got a very high level of agreement, with 40.6% agreeing with that statement and 8.4% strongly agreeing. This is a pool of very avid board gamers, not people who left the hobby because they didn't like what they saw. And this is a real alarm bell as a market researcher myself, looking at this level of discontent with the play experiences encountered within board gaming, within the board gaming hobby, is a huge delimiting factor for the growth of the overall market and stultifies and stunts the hobby itself. So this is a big finding, and something that I'm sharing with publishers, game industry professionals as widely as I can, because it is a real alarm bell for the industry. All of these stories and perspectives shared through my online survey and qualitative interviews with avid board gamers gave me significant pause. Board gaming, all gaming, is meant to be an escape, a respite from the everyday. We're supposed to use it as an opportunity to de-stress from our jobs and our hectic lives. But not everyone has the same experience in board gaming as a respite, a break, a little island of calm and welcome in our very hectic lives. And one of the things that I've taken away from some of this research, as I did when I was working in public health, is these behaviors have real physical and mental impacts on those that experience them. It raises blood pressure, it creates issues for your long-term health. And that's why it's so important to have inclusive, welcoming spaces. I'm going to land here on the quote by A.A. George, a writer I admire, who talked about how, for many of us, this is a quote, gaming is not simply a hobby, but a home. Let's make it both inclusive and diverse. And that's what our work is all about. My thanks to the organizers of the Canadian Game Studies Association annual conference. Thank you so much for your hard work in pulling this together. Thank you for listening to this. I'm Tanya Pobeda. I am reachable on Twitter at Pobeda Tanya, and at my website at tanyapobeda.phd.com. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciated this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the conference.